So with us today from Germany, we have the Athletic Solly K, who was in Dusseldorf as England beat Switzerland on penalties, and also Jacob Whitehead, who's in Berlin and saw the Netherlands come from behind to beat Turkey. Oh, let's start with you, Ollie. England in to yet another semi-finals in a major tournament. Gareth Southgate changed things up a little bit, but the question is, were England actually any better though?
I thought the first half was better. I thought the first half was the best they've played so far in the tournament. I wasn't crazy excited about it. I know some people were sort of talking as if they'd seen the light and it was magnificent, but I felt it was a decent first half, and it was a sort of a platform to build on for the second half, which they didn't. You know, their second half performance was pretty dreadful until the Saka equaliser. I think, I don't think they've cracked it yet at all at this tournament. It's been scratchy performances, some draws, some very unconvincing wins. I think they deserve some credit for what they did from going 1-0 down. I think they deserve some credit, a lot of credit for the impact the players made from the bench, for everything they did around the penalties, and for having the mentality to get through. But I think we're all looking for an improvement in terms of performance, aren't we, as the tests get tougher?
Yeah, for sure. Well, there's a piece that's dropped this morning on The Athletic. Tim Spears and Mark Carey sort of looking at Harry Kane and wondering whether or not we should compare Harry Kane to Ronaldo in terms of, I guess, lack of goal involvement, if we look at it in that respect, Ollie. He struggled to make an impact yet again, I guess. What would you make of how he's performed in this tournament?
I don't think he looks fit and sharp. I felt that from the first game. I looked at him and I thought, he looks kind of way off it, really, in terms of the physical requirements. And Gareth Southgate hinted as much afterwards, after that game and after the second game, when he subbed him against Denmark. And I don't think it's that surprising, because he's obviously had a long, hard season, and has had finished that season with injury, a back injury, which is very inhibiting and can limit a player in a big way. Missed the last 4 weeks of the season through injury. So by the time the Euros came back, he hadn't played for about 5-6 weeks, something like that. Since then, he's sort of been trying to regain sharpness on the pitch, and that's not ideal. I don't think he looks at it. He keeps insisting, his physical condition's fine, but he doesn't look like it. And funny enough, we said this about Kane at tournaments before, when they come at the end of the season and it's a case of sort of trying to build up to a peak again, when realistically players aren't really conditioned to peak in June at the end of the season in terms of their fitness and their sharpness. And he's even in the 2018 World Cup, where he won the Golden Boot and obviously he did well at the last Euros, there were these questions about, does he look mobile enough? Does he look sharp enough? And sometimes he'll just sweep away those questions with a flurry of goals. And he scored two in 5 games at this tournament, which is not the worst by any means. I mean, he's not really. It's in a sort of misfiring, sort of poorly functioning team at some ways. It's not creating loads of chances. He scored 2 goals, and really well taken goals, against Denmark and Slovakia. And in terms of his chance conversion, you can't criticise at all. It's more the question of whether he's fit and whether he's bringing as much to the table in terms of his all-round game as you want him to and need to. So I can understand there being a debate around this point. I wouldn't leave him out of the starting lineup at all. I really wouldn't. But I felt as the game went on Saturday that they're not getting much out of him here. He looks spent, and it's probably only with one eye on penalties that you're keeping him on. And then obviously there was the collision with Southgate on the bench, at which point Southgate brought Ivan Toney on, and Toney came on and scored a penalty, and all worked out quite nicely.
Yeah, Jacob, is it fair to compare him to Ronaldo? I mean, age profile of the players is very different. I guess from where you're sitting, how do you think he complements, the players around him as well, especially in this tournament?
I suppose it's one where, with the personnel which Southgate is picking every game, it feels as if it's not suited to Kane's strength. You've got Bellingham who loves to burst forward, Kane who likes to drop back, and you have Foden who wants to drift in from the left, and you kind of end up with these pockets of space which are quite congested. Now, in an advanced system, that's fine. You can work out rotations when players kind of have fitness, they can really exploit that. But when England only have one player in Saka who wants to run in behind, and you don't have either a left winger or even an overlapping left back who can push on that side, you start to get a little bit of a sort of staticness, I think is the right word. I think you do have moments where building up around the final third where the only player really moving is the player on the ball and maybe a sort of midfielder jogging forward, and that is not really what Kane's game is about. You almost want him to be the single point, which everything else pivots around as he drops back. And obviously, the Kane we've seen before at Tottenham and at Bayern this season, when he has dropped back and we want him to drop back, that's part of his game. It's what makes him Harry Kane. But he's previously then been able to read it enough to really burst into the box and get those poachers goals when he needs to. And like Ollie said, he is scoring, but he needs to make sure that he still keeps that sort of in the 6 yard box in the 6 yard box element to his game, just to almost keep defenses honest, really.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, Ollie, this lack of fitness that we seem to see, and as Jacob's alluded to, it stops him from being sort of that pinpoint in which the players are passing through. Do you think that also affects England's pressing as well?
It does. I mean, when Kane first came into the team at Spurs, he was a sort of all energy centre forward, and he did an awful lot of pressing. When that Pochettino team was at its peak, the last few years he's as a lot of great players do as they get older, he's become a lot more economical with his movement. He doesn't press the opposition as much. He's not necessarily a weak link in that respect, but he's just not like the Kane of his youth in terms of the ground he covers, the sprints, etc. There were some interesting stats that came out earlier in the tournament about his pressing and not just the number of sprints he does off the ball, but the speed of them and how perhaps they're not as quick as they need to be for England to press well. I don't think England have pressed well at all at this tournament. They just haven't got it right. Bellingham as well is a player with great physical attributes, but I don't think he's particularly a great presser of the ball. Foden and Saka are very hard working players, but they're not the kind of players to lead a press in the way that a classic pressing team needs. So I think England have been fairly inactive out of possession, and Kane has been a part of that. And I don't think at this age and this stage of his career anybody's expecting him to be this sort of one man pressing machine. I think probably Southgate's looked at it and thought, well, we're not getting much pressing out of him. We need to make sure that he's ready and he's fresh when we have the ball, and I'd say that's been the bigger concern. I just think England as a team haven't looked particularly sprightly or energetic when they've had the ball. There's been moments of inspiration from individual players. Obviously, we've seen Bellingham, we saw Saka on Saturday with a goal from nowhere. Really, it was. But in terms of actual sort of fast, intricate, energetic, incisive movements, we just aren't seeing that from England. But semi-finals. This is where it starts. Maybe it's all going to click now.
Yeah, maybe we keep saying that into the next game each time. Jacob, this idea of Harry Kane, right? And we were just talking about this before we started recording the pod. Him coming deep, and so many of us trying to understand why he cuts so deep. And but actually, I was watching that Switzerland game, and yeah, he comes deep, but he offers something defensively as well to this England team, which has been quite good to see. But are we in conflict as to how we want Harry Kane to be versus the player he actually is on the field?
I think if we go back to the third minute of the Euros final and Luke Shaw's goal, that was entirely created by Kane dropping deep, opening up space. There's another England goal. I've just been trying for the last couple of minutes to work out who for the life of me it was against. I think it was either Spain or Italy, where I think England's best goal under Southgate was scored with Kane dropping back, players in behind it. So it creates all this moment. It creates all of these moments. It is how England's attack has historically functioned best under Southgate. I think the issue more comes back to the lack of sort of off-ball runners he's selecting, and to an extent as well with Bellingham not quite bursting through as much as we're possibly used to him doing, or we have seen at Real Madrid this season. I'm a big defender of Kane and will protect his right to drop deep, almost as if it's sort of one of England's sort of amendment rights.
There we go. See, put it there. Stick the flag in. You're the voice for Kane. I love that. Ollie, Mark Carey and Tim Spears point out in their piece that tournaments have actually been won without a top number 9. I think there was Olivier Giroud in 2018. I don't think he even registered a shot on goal or something along those lines. It's in their article. But he also offered some really good link-up play. That should also be brought into account. Often, all the teams, sometimes teams win, but all the players don't play as effectively as they should.
Yeah, it's very often the case with teams that win tournaments. I wouldn't liken Kane to Stefan Givash of France in '98 or anything like that. I mean, we're talking about a completely different caliber of player and a completely different international career. And someone like Givash was a workhorse who sort of took a lot of knocks for the team and held the ball up. Kane is a world class goal scorer, a world class creator as well. Can be, and it just isn't quite flowing for him. It's not flowing for England as a team. I think if England were creating chances and sort of getting behind the opposition all the time and putting balls in the box and pullbacks and sort of through balls and so on, I think we'd see Kane absolutely, not necessarily hitting the numbers he's hit previously, because I don't think he looks 100% sharp, but I think he showed in that game against Denmark and in the game against Slovakia that if there's a chance, if there's a ball pinging around a penalty area, he'll probably score. And I think that I think he's almost had to sort of. I think there are two issues. One is he fit? Is he sharp? And the other is the team creating enough for him to play? To score goals, for you to expect and demand for him to be more of a goal threat than he's been. And I think in terms of the last bit, I don't think the team has been creating enough. It's not like they've been constantly putting balls in a box and you're thinking, God, where's Kane at this point? It's. I think there's it's very different to the sort of Ronaldo question. Some similarities in that you think, as the game goes on, do they need something fresh here? And I'm glad that Southgate has been willing to mix it up and look beyond what Roberto Martinez did with Portugal. But I still feel that if England were creating more, Kane would be enjoying himself more and would probably look sharper than he has to this point.
What are your thoughts, Jacob, on this one? Do you need a firing number 9 to win a tournament?
I think even at this tournament, kind of 4 semi-finalists, and we're going to get onto this later, have their own question marks over exactly who the number 9 is going to be, whether it's what position they're going to play, what player it should be, if there's a better scorer on the bench. And one of them is going to win the Euros. It's just a fact now. So, I don't think you need you need a functioning number 9. You don't necessarily need a number 9 who's sort of leading the way in terms of goals, assists. I'm perfectly happy with Slovakia's Ivan Šranc remaining as top scorer for the rest of the Euros. That's not ultimately going to be what wins it.
Okay, joining us right now to add more insight from a tactical perspective is the Athletics football tactics writer, Ahmed Walid. Ahmed, we're talking strikers, right? Especially in Euro 2024. Let's focus on the Dutch, because England play them in the next match in the Euros. They've been very interesting, in particular Memphis Depay and Wout Weghorst, who actually are very different options for the Dutch. Tell us how Koeman's utilised them.
Koeman has started with Memphis in most of the games, or actually all of the games, as the leading centre forward for the Netherlands. But actually, he brings on Weghorst whenever he needs him, and he needed him a lot. So Depay, in theory, offers dropping deeper to link the play and combine, but he actually had a lot of problems in most of the games. So against France, Saliba gave him a hard time because he couldn't have much time on the ball to drop and link, and even against surprisingly organized Turkish defense in the first half. Meanwhile, Weghorst offers like an aerial outlet for the Netherlands if they want to bypass the press, and is more of an attacking threat inside the penalty area when they want to put crosses into the box, as we've seen in the second half against Austria, when he actually assisted Memphis' goal, which made it 2-2 before Austria won the game. And he actually, like Weghorst, changed the game against Turkey, while also it wasn't from an actual cross, it was more of a pass into the box against Poland, but he scored the winner as well against Poland. So till now, Weghorst is the more beneficial one out of Depay, but it's useful for Koeman that he has two completely different options. So Depay, Memphis to drop and link the play, and actually Weghorst coming on as a plan B, more of an aerial outlet in the box.
Yeah, for sure. Jacob, you've written about this, Depay versus Weghorst, and many people remember Weghorst from his Burnley days in the Premier League, and also obviously Manchester United. They're very different profile players, really. Sort of Depay's is sort of converted wide man playing number 9, and Weghorst, as we've seen, in that game against Turkey, can offer them a real killer instinct when they need it.
Yeah, there is a real culture war in the Netherlands over which camp you're in. And Koeman's kind of made this distinction between them himself. He's talked about Depay having Dutch qualities and Weghorst having English qualities. And he doesn't necessarily use English qualities as a compliment. I suppose Depay also is a much less popular figure in the Netherlands than Weghorst, who is this real cult hero. There's a banner of him in the away end before every single match. He scored goals in qualification, which ultimately got them to this tournament, winners in both games against Ireland. And just his personality as well with Weghorst. I mean, he famously in the Netherlands sort of used to go for walks with lonely elderly people, just sort of spend time with them and have a chat. And it's all of these sorts of things which have sort of really made people fall in love with this guy who's worked up really the hard way to the place where he is. That said, there's this image of Dutch football which we all have and we've written about extensively, which Depay fits into much better. The way I've sort of likened it before is that putting on Weghorst is kind of like buying an elasticated bow tie. You sometimes just have to do it, but you never feel super proud of yourself by doing it. It's sort of an admission of your own kind of inability to do what you really want to do. And so they're kind of permanently left in a situation where every game it gets to an hour and Koeman is, shall I break the glass and bring on Wout? And so far, every single game they have, Koeman's plan A's aren't working very well, but his plan B's are working really, really well.
Yeah, I mean, you could sort of say, same as Southgate, Ollie, the plan A isn't working well. Maybe we should look at a plan B. Ivan Toney sitting there waiting offers a very different profile to Harry Kane. Ollie Watkins, for instance, as well.
Yeah, as Jacob was talking about plan A not working very often and always having to revert to plan B, I was just thinking, yeah, well, that's been England the last two games in particular, where it hasn't worked. And I think one of the factors is Kane has struggled in terms of sharpness, but he's also struggled in terms of service to him. Ivan Toney has I think there's a slight sort of revisionism over the equaliser against Slovakia, as if it was purely because Ivan Toney had been brought on seconds earlier. I think it was Mark Gahey who headed it on, and then Bellingham with the fantastic goal. Obviously, Toney then had a huge part in the second goal for Kane, and he then sort of led the line really well when he came on. I didn't think he had such an impact on Saturday outside of the penalty shootout, but it was he's shown an ability to be that sort of plan B or plan C off the bench. And that's interesting because if you go back to the second game where England was struggling to break down Denmark, at that point Ollie Watkins seemed to be ahead of him in the pecking order. Southgate turned to Ollie Watkins in, I think it was a triple substitution, about midway through the second half, and Watkins immediately came on and looked sharper, looked more likely to get in behind the defence. Whereas the last two games, I think Southgate's looked at it and thought, well, we're getting a lot of possession high up the pitch. We need more of an aerial presence in the box, and that's why he's turned to Toney. But it's going to be fascinating because it's, you know, if England are in that situation again where they're sort of losing with 10 minutes to go or 5 minutes to go, whatever. Do they take off Harry Kane? Do they leave Kane on the pitch for as long as possible? Do they then put Toney on, Watkins on? I guess Palmer, Eze have both already made big impacts from the bench. Anthony Gordon we've not really seen yet, but it does feel like Southgate will stick to the plan A, even though we probably know that plan B and plan C is what has helped England get to this far through the tournament.
Yeah, Ahmed, I'm just interested from your perspective, you know, what your opinions are on sort of this idea of a target man, a false nine, and how this might be evolving in international football, because as we've mentioned here and there, you know, the very different teams are utilising that position in very different ways.
Yeah, I think we need to be more specific when we're talking about target men, because you've got like Morata, Kane and Havertz, for example. They could be target men, but the thing is that they offer other stuff. So, and most teams don't want to lump the ball forward, because like lumping the ball forward would mean that they could lose it easier, so that they lose possession and they lose control of the game. So that's why teams like, for example, England, Spain, so England to a lesser degree because we've seen Pickford lump it forward to Kane, but like Germany and Spain, for example, they can do that to Havertz and Morata, but they are more trying to circulate the ball to have more control of the game. Even, for example, Arnautovic for Austria, sometimes they played it long because he could win the aerial duel or they could win the second balls, but he could actually drop and link as well. So most of the teams are going with the plan A of having a more complete, more rounded center forward, I would say. So the target men we're talking about are the ones who don't have the technical quality on the ball, like someone like Niklas Füllkrug or Wout Weghorst. So these players are more, their main strength is aerially, and they've been coming on as a plan B. Have they been beneficial to Netherlands and Germany? Definitely. So we just spoke about Weghorst, and Füllkrug offered a great plan B for Germany when they wanted to change their approach to be more focused on crossing mainly. So they did that against Switzerland, and he scored in added time, the equalizer. And I thought when he came on against Spain, he helped a lot. And actually, he could have scored another equalizer after Mikel Merino's goal in the 122 minute, I think. So yeah, but we've seen like Spain, Germany, France, Netherlands have all went with a plan A of a non-target man, if we're talking about target men in this way. They are trying to have a more rounded center forward. But like Havertz's end product was not that good this tournament, but his movement and link-up was crucial to Germany's attack. I don't think Füllkrug would ever like offer this from the beginning, and this is something that Nagelsmann wanted. So that's why we've seen Havertz start. I thought he had an okay tournament, like been good in everything apart from the goal scoring, which is obviously the most important thing. Morata didn't have a great tournament. I think his best game is the Italy one, but overall his movement in the penalty box when Spain are crossing, and the Spanish have changed their approach a bit in the final third. They're more direct. They want to depend more on crosses. So his off-ball movement inside the box actually helps the number 8s coming from behind, and we've seen that in Daniel Olmo's goal, and we've seen it in Mikel Merino's goal, and also Fabian Ruiz runs in the penalty box. I think the only one who's not a quote-unquote target man who actually had like a bad tournament till now is Memphis. So that's the clear example of the plan B, which is Weghorst coming on and being more beneficial. But also if you look, for example, at Switzerland or Turkey, they don't play with a target man at all. So Turkey have Cenk Tosun, ex-Everton player on the bench, but they don't use him at all. They only use him as a plan C, I would say. So it's mainly Barış Yilmaz or Arda Güler who are very technical, and we've seen them like sometimes Güler is the center forward and dropping maybe in a false 9 role. Sometimes it's Barış Yilmaz who's a bit smaller but offers mainly runs in behind and technical quality, and he also featured on the right as well. And in terms of Switzerland, they started with Dua in the first game, but he wasn't really a target man. And then Shaqiri in the second game, who mainly dropped and played as a false 9. And Brel Mbolo in the remaining games has mainly been dropping. They're not lumping it forward to Mbolo. So I just think because of Fulkrug and Weghorst's important goals and their impact, they are drawing the bigger attention. But all of the teams are mainly not playing with a center forward who only offers an aerial outlet. Like, all of the teams want a more rounded center forward. And I think, like, the more important question is, even those more rounded center forwards, they haven't been the best players in the tournament. Like, you wouldn't say, like, I don't think Kane's having a good tournament, as everyone said, for I think 2-3 reasons. It's not only one reason. Morata is not Spain's best player. Havertz was not Germany's best player. And I think France, the back four and the midfield have been way, way better than the front line. So I think that's another question to be asked.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that brings us nicely to France, and I'm really interested, very quickly from your perspective, why you think they've struggled with that fluidity up front, because they do have a target man in Olivier Giroud. I know he's 37 years old, but this is a player that's known to get the poacher's goal or create something out of nothing. But in that position, they've had Marcus Thuram, Kylian Mbappe and Kolo Muani as well, yet France still aren't scoring.
We all know that France are a risk-averse team on the ball, so they won't go all-out attack, and they won't have this intricate combination plays in the final third, like Spain or Germany. They more want to have a controlled game defensive-wise. They don't want to lose the game. They want to utilize the pace of their forwards, like maybe on counter-attacks or on transitions, and it works for them, but I think it mainly works because of the individual quality of the defenders and the midfielders. So Kanté has had a great tournament. I think the back four has been brilliant too. Koundé, Saliba, Upamecano, Magnan. I think Magnan's numbers, he saved 4 goals more than they expected. So it's just France's style of play. They don't want to be the team controlling the game, having the ball. They would rather the other team have the ball and they could strike on the counter. And I think it's also interesting to see what happens if France concede first. So in all of France's games, so the Austria game, they didn't concede, Netherlands didn't concede, Poland, they actually scored first. So the interesting question is, how will France play if they concede first and they have to attack? I think this is the interesting part here.
Yeah, I think spot on. And we've written about France in this tournament on The Athletic and how really it's about control. And I guess when control's taken out of their hands and they have to chase the game, it'd be fascinating to see how they come to the fore. Ollie, very quickly on Mbappe, ahead of his move to Real Madrid, massive move for him. This is a player who doesn't look top form, very similar to Kane in this competition, and I know he's had his nose broken in the earlier games, but he doesn't seem to have the same potency as we're used to seeing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting with Mbappe because I was at that first game against France-Austria game in Dusseldorf, and he produced sort of 3 or 4 of those sort of electrifying runs in that game where you thought, wow, he sort of takes your breath away. But there wasn't really a great deal beyond that. Then there was the broken nose, and obviously the game he missed. Then he came back against Poland, scored a penalty. But I think in the last 2 games, Belgium and Portugal, he's looked like a player who's going to make things happen. And I think that's the difference when we're comparing with Kane or Ronaldo or Morata. Say it's the amount of work he's done off the ball, not off the ball, away from those central areas, on the left, often cutting inside. He's had a number of those runs. If you look at his stats for shot creating actions, and you compare that to sort of Kane or Ronaldo, it's off the chart. He's a guy who is instigating things and is creating things, and it's often creating things for himself because we all know that sort of signature move he has, cutting in from the left, and he's that close from one of them flying in, really. And I think if he had scored, I think we'd scored another goal that wasn't a penalty, I think we'd be looking at his contribution, his tournament so far, very differently. But there is also that question of whether the facial injury, the nose injury, has inhibited him slightly. It might not perhaps in full flight, but maybe in those sort of physical duels in the penalty area, maybe that's made him less inclined to get involved and less inclined to sort of put himself in where it hurts. But I think he's still, big game on Tuesday against Spain. I think he's still probably the player that everybody in the France team is looking to create something out of nothing, really, and probably also to be the one who pops up with a goal. So his role is both of those things, and I feel like at the moment he's doing both of those things quite well without it really clicking.
Yeah, all right. Ahmed, I know we've got to let you go, but I really appreciate your time, and I'll be interested to test out your theory on whether or not France go from behind against Spain, who haven't lost in this tournament, and see actually if they can turn up the juice in this tournament. Thanks so much for your time, bro. Yeah, Jacob, let's get into this. Ahmed spoke quite vividly about the various strikers in this tournament. I think we should focus on Spain as, we've got a really interesting character in Alvaro Morata, but he's only scored once in this tournament. Does that prove sometimes that we need to look a little deeper into how certain players operate within a particular system, as opposed to just expecting them to be, that classic number 9 that scores 5 or 6 goals in a tournament?
It doesn't, because Morata is clearly hugely important to Spain's style of play. He's a very clever player, and he's able to bring others around him into play. Their whole attacking system is really about bringing those wingers into play and giving them one-on-ones. He's managed to do that really well. At the same time, he is still missing some chances, and Dani Olmo, who's the replacement in a different style of player and in a false 9, has been absolutely fantastic, arguably, or probably alongside Nico Williams, probably the most impressive attacker. So sounds cliche, but it's a wonderful, wonderful problem for Luis de la Fuente to have.
Alvaro Morata, former striker turned super agent. Can you imagine that after he retires? That would be so much fun. Anyway, let's talk about Morata. And actually, I think in context of Harry Kane as well, Ollie, in terms of him being the captain of, I guess, a youngish Spanish team. And similar to Harry Kane, this inexperienced England team, having a captain with so much experience up front can only really be a good thing in terms of, what he can bring in terms of leadership to that team.
Yeah, he's a fascinating player because you look at the profile of player he is and his strengths, and you would say he has everything to be the sort of complete modern centre forward. And I'm just looking at some quotes from him now where we've spoken this morning. He said he feels like he doesn't get any respect in Spain because I guess I don't know. I don't know whether he's judged on his time at Real Madrid or whatever, but it feels like he's you look at his international goal scorer record, it's very good. You look at his Champions League record, it's very good. Scored, I think he seems to have blown hot and cold a bit in La Liga, and he certainly blew more cold than hot in the Premier League when he was at Chelsea. And I'm never quite sure how good he is and how. I mean, I feel like when you see him on the pitch with Spain, he's got everything it takes in terms of his goal threat, his intelligence, link-up play. But I think he probably hasn't had that sort of huge moment or huge defining contribution to a winning team that in recent years that you'd sort of demand players have. Maybe it's the same. Maybe Kane is perceived the same in terms of winning things. I don't know, but he's a very, very good player, very good all-round threat. I find it surprising when I read him say that he feels he gets respected more elsewhere than in Spain, because I could imagine him being a player who might think he doesn't get any respect outside of Spain. I don't know. He's a really good player. I've really enjoyed watching those first 2 games where he played really well against Croatia and Italy. But yeah, against Germany, I certainly thought Dani Olmo gave him a lot more attacking threat. But Olmo's another fascinating one because you speak to people I was speaking to a German reporter the other day, and I was saying, how has Dani Olmo been the one who's sort of been left behind at Leipzig when all of these other players, I was enthusing about him, and he was saying, in terms of week to week consistency, Olmo isn't the player that we've seen for Spain at the last 2 Euros, and it's fascinating.
Having listened to Paul's excellent description of what Morata brings, I was just thinking to myself, I know a guy who'd be perfect for that role in terms of pinning back defenders, bringing space, being a much loved characters in the squad. It's Wout Weghorst, isn't it? I mean,
You're
it sounds
back
like
there again.
he'd do a great job in this Spain side, it sounds like.
I love that. I love that. But yeah, I guess it does bring into question then, obviously with Harry Kane and in England in particular. I mean, does Harry Kane offer those qualities in terms of beautiful link-up play, connecting the attack? In that respect, Jacob, he's definitely got the experience. He's definitely a captain for this team. He's definitely someone to look up to. But actually, are we surprised that he was subbed off in both of these knockout games, for instance?
I feel like I've nailed my colours to the mast in terms of me being happy for him to link up. But I think there's quite an interesting thing with international football, which is whereas in the club game, if you have sort of an outstanding striker, it's kind of accepted much more readily. After 70, 75 minutes, they might come off as part of a rotation. And then I feel like when it comes to international football, people are way more reluctant to do that. The talismans become more talismanic. I don't know if there's sort of a certain nationalism to it, or purely because of the sort of like stakes we see in the game at every sort of number of knockout games there are. But it feels like something which we're far less likely to consider in terms of subbing off the player early. But I mean, Spain did it with Morata regularly. Germany did it with Füllkrug and Havertz. It's proven to work. I think it's just sort of one where it's sort of emotion versus logic, really.
And Ollie, into the semi-final against the Netherlands, and we've probably spoken about this quite a lot of times, it doesn't seem as if Harry Kane, lack of fitness or not, isn't going to start that game, surely. Gareth Southgate can't make such a big change at this point in the tournament.
No, I don't think it would be the right change to make. I'm sure you would be able to find people who would say, yeah, drop Kane, drop Foden, drop Bellingham. But Southgate's certainly not going to be one of those. I wouldn't be in favour of dropping Kane. I don't think he's firing on all cylinders by any means, but I think he's still the guy that you would want something to drop to in the penalty area, and he's still doing an important job. I don't think he's doing it to the standard we've seen in the past. But I just feel, and this definitely comes back to the Ronaldo thing. There's got to be more of a willingness, I think, when something's not working, to be willing to take off that big player, that big talismanic player, and I think Southgate has shown that with Kane in, is it 3 of the 5 games? Is it 4 of the 5 games? He has subbed him, and at times subbed him when England have needed a goal. And I think I'm not saying it's particularly strong management, it's pragmatic management, but it's management. Whereas I think what we saw with Ronaldo with Portugal, that wasn't management. That was sort of almost letting the player's status manage the situation. So I would say yes, definitely start with Kane. Definitely hope that he clicks and gets the chances, and if he does, he'll score. And if it's not working, if he looks spent like he did in extra time in the last 2 games, then yeah, definitely be willing to take him off. You've seen now that Ivan Toney can do a job from the bench. You've seen that Ollie Watkins can offer things that Kane can't, and it's not. When Southgate talks about this philosophy of, we don't have a starting 11, we have starters and finishers. Well, yeah, then show that. Be willing to trust your substitutes, and he has done in moments of desperation over the last 2 games. But I feel like it perhaps at times needs to be a bit more proactive rather than reactive with the subs.
Yeah. Well, let's finish on the Netherlands, Jacob. I feel like as this pod goes on, you're more and more flying the flag for Wout Weghorst to start for the Netherlands. But how do they punish England with their attacking setup? Does Koeman make, a last-ditch approach to start with Weghorst and then perhaps play Depay on the wing, for instance? Because that's also a combination that we could be looking at here.
Yeah, you're right. I think there's no world in which Depay doesn't start. Koeman's been very open about the fact he's one of his favourites. Before the tournament, he had a few players who were coming back from injury, and he said, I've only got two exceptions. Frankie de Jong, midfielder, who didn't get back to fitness, and Memphis Depay. He's going to play him somewhere. But yeah, there is the option, as they tried this actually against Canada in the warm-up games, and then they've sort of only used it as an emergency. But then either playing Depay at number 10 or on the right and having Weghorst up front and then allowing one of them to drift in. And Depay actually had really important roles in the two goals against Turkey from this sort of new position. For the first goal, he got the assist for Stefan de Vrij after sort of taking part in a short corner routine, but out wide where he wouldn't normally be. And for the second goal, he turned positively Weghorstian. I mean, there's a ball across the face of goal, and he just gave the Turkish centre-back a tiny little nudge. It was one of those sorts of little sneaky bits of striker play you see, which just allowed the ball to get across to the combination of sort of Mulder and Gakpo, which forced it into the net. So I could personally, I think it's most likely that Koeman will stick with what he wants to do. He's kind of quite slow to change things, but he's prepared to make those changes early. I mean, he brought Weghorst on at half-time last time, and I think that's the approach he'd go for again.
Okay, gents, thanks so much for your time. 2 juicy semi-finals in the Euros coming up. Cannot wait for that. And Ollie, Jacob, thank you for joining us once again. Now, if you're after more from the Euros, remember to check out the Totally Football Show. And our daily football briefing brings you all the news from both the Euros and Copa America in just 10 minutes throughout the summer. We'll be back tomorrow for a deep dive into another of the day's biggest stories. As always, thanks so much for listening. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.